Hello, welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Kate Harper from the 61st District in Montgomery County. Pennsylvania is blessed to have abundant natural resources, including large deposits of natural gas that lie underground between layers of shale. Newer drilling technologies have allowed companies to extract this gas that was before unreachable. And as a result, the industry has boomed. Pennsylvania is front and center in its success. On today's program, I thought it would be a good idea to examine the economic impact of the Marcellus Shale natural gas industry on our state's economy, while also discussing it from an environmental point of view. And my guest today is the chairman of the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee, Representative John Maher. Representative John Maher, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Welcome to the program.
Thank you for the invitation.
All right, now John, what I usually do is let my audience know a little bit about my guests so that they understand where you're coming from. Now, I know you're a certified public accountant, and I know you're chairman of the Environmental Committee, but what else can you tell the viewers so that they'd understand, where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school?
I moved around quite a bit growing up, but I landed in Pennsylvania in my high school years in Carlisle, which is in the central part of the state. After that, I had the good fortune to pursue higher education on 3 continents. I went to Duke as an undergraduate, and I studied at Oxford in England and at the Australian Graduate School of Management, which obviously is Australia.
I can't understand why you went to Duke. Okay, never mind.
Well, in any case, I was fortunate enough to have had that round-the-world experience, and it was time to decide where did I want to plant some roots. And I weighed the pluses and minuses, and I chose to come back to Pennsylvania because it, I think, offers the great combination, everything you want in a big city, everything you want in the countryside, everything you want in a forest or a stream. And so I've been in the Pittsburgh region now for about 35 years, and 18 of those years I've been in the House of Representatives, although it was nothing I had aspired to. I'm a CPA. As you mentioned, I began my career with one of the international accounting firms, worked up the ranks there, and then started my own firm from scratch to compete against the international firms. And did very well, and I'm proud to say it became one of the best places to work in Pennsylvania by all sorts of measures. And the firm continues today, but I stepped away from the firm in order to commit myself to public service.
Well, I think that's good. And I also think the job that you now hold in the legislature, chairing the Environmental and Energy Committee, is a big one, especially because Pennsylvania seems to be in the eye of the Marcellus Shale. If you think it's a storm, we're in the middle of it.
We are indeed. It was actually a professor at Penn State who some years ago came up with this notion that there was an ocean of gas beneath Pennsylvania of quantities unlike any that Pennsylvania had seen before. Now, the original well drilling for commercial purposes was in Pennsylvania. The world's first refinery was in Pennsylvania, but that boom happened over 100 years ago.
Right, didn't they drill for oil in Titusville?
Titusville, that's right.
Right, I don't even know where Titusville is, do you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
But, and the first refinery was in Pittsburgh and became ultimately what was then Gulf Oil, which is now emerged away.
Something else.
Yeah. But we have this Marcellus Shale formation, and it's deep. The wells that had existed up through now were typically 1,000 feet or so, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less, where the new drilling goes down more than a mile, and then once it's down a mile, it goes laterally. It goes left or right.
Horizontally.
Horizontal. Right? Sorry, horizontally. And it can extend for another mile or 3 or 5 in some cases, depending on what the geology is. So as a result of this, up and through about 2008, Pennsylvania was having almost 5,000 gas wells drilled every year of the what we now call conventional wells,
okay.
the style of drilling that had happened for 100 years before. 5,000 new wells each year. Now, with the Marcellus, because you're able to cover such a broader space with this horizontal drilling, the number of wells that's been drilled each of the past 2 years is about 2,000. So we've actually decreased the number of holes being punched into the ground by about 60%.
Much more gas, aren't we?
We are producing unbelievable quantities of gas. Back 10 years ago, you wouldn't think of Pennsylvania possibly reaching 1 trillion MCF, which is 1,000 cubic feet. And folks may see this on their, if they have a gas utility, they get billed typically by MCFs. So they can look at their home gas bill and see how many MCFs you use during the course of a month. And for many families, that's maybe 100 MCF. Pennsylvania is on track this year to produce 5 trillion MCFs of gas. 5 trillion.
So I've heard people say that Pennsylvania is the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. Is that right?
Yeah, we really are at this point. That it is because of the natural gas that has displaced oil and gasoline and other, in so many uses, that it finally broke the Arabian cartel's back. And that is what caused the Saudi Arabians to just, the heck with trying to have cartel pricing. They drop the price because they're hoping to slow down gas production here in the United States.
But
and it's really Pennsylvania.
That's leading actually to lower prices at the pump.
It absolutely does. And Pennsylvanians are winners when they look at their costs for their gas utilities. If you look today and pull out a gas bill from 5 years ago, you'll find your cost of gas has plummeted. When you go to the gas station to fill up your vehicle, you'll find that everybody knows the price of gas has come down. And that is because Pennsylvania has become a great energy exporter. We were already an exporter of electricity and an exporter of coal, but now we export gas. But the challenge with exporting natural gas is that it has to go through a pipeline. And with the pipeline, think of a highway, that you can only get so many vehicles on a pipeline, on a highway, and you can only get so much gas through a pipeline. And not every pipeline is going to run every place. So what producers receive for their gas varies greatly across the state. In the northeastern corner of the state, there's a real absence of pipelines, so they have a whole huge supply of gas.
Well, that's because they get so much snow and winter lasts so long in Maine,
Maybe that's a factor. But there have been so many new wells drilled up there that the supply of gas far outstrips the capacity of the pipelines. Consequently, the folks that operate the pipelines are saying, or buying through there, how low are you willing to go? And so gas is selling in the Northeast for about $1 an MCF from the gas producer.
Which is great.
Well, it's great. It's great if you're a buyer.
Yeah.
But it does discourage folks from
producing it. Right.
And
it's interesting. Most people don't know this, but actually Lower Gwinnett has a Williams Company gas pipeline that runs right through it. Most people don't know that, and I know it, but if they look, they can see these yellow pipes in various places sticking up from the ground, or a broad area that's been, the grass is always mowed. And that's actually a transcontinental gas line.
And if you think about it, and beyond the transcontinental ones, the ones which are most fragile are those that go to our homes.
Yeah, that's true too.
And they're everywhere.
For people who have gas heat or stoves, things like that.
Right, and a lot of those are the old iron pipes, which are deteriorating over time. And if to the extent people get concerned about gas lines, their number one concern should be making sure that the neighborhood pipelines are up to date. And we took action to encourage that a couple of years ago by providing that the rate cases that go to the PUC, and I know this is getting a little complicated, but to the extent that there are regulated prices that the gas companies that deliver to your homes can charge, that we made it that they had to separate out their distribution costs so that there's a special attention given to, are they investing to improve that infrastructure for the public safety?
Right, which I think is a good idea. Although I represent a suburban community, we're in the Philadelphia media market, and there's an unfortunately high number of natural gas explosions, particularly in the winter, in the city of Philadelphia, which has a different gas distribution system.
And those are never on the major pipelines. Those are always on the local distribution.
The ones in the street or the ones that run from the street to your house.
Right.
But let's talk about big picture again.
Let me ask you, you're talking about a pipeline going through the community. In the town I live in, which is very suburban, there are active gas wells that have been there 60, 70 years and generally have a little fence around them and some shrubbery, and it's just part of the landscape. They don't jump out because what's left is infrastructure after the actual drilling and after it's connected to a gathering system It doesn't take up very much space, and it's
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. And I think we have some pictures of a drilling site that we can put up and show people that in the beginning, big crane and everything, it's quite
Sure.
a lot of
like
noise and fuss and bother,
well,
right?
Any construction site for any purpose is going to have a lot of noise while you're in the construction mode. It's just the way it is. And
Right.
so it's very similar to the folks that haven't actually seen a gas well site. Just imagine if somebody was building a warehouse. It's about the same. You see a couple of cranes, you see some pipes in the air, you'll see fencing.
I've heard that they are work round the clock and they use a lot of lights.
They do work around the clock. They
Right.
do, and that can be troubling to folks, no
Right.
doubt.
But that's only in the beginning, right? When they're
Right.
first drilling the well?
Sure.
And then after they drill the well, then what happens?
Well, once it's connected to a gathering system that then feeds into a pipeline, basically there are valves that are controlled. Generally, it's by computers now, and the gas just comes.
So this is probably surprising to you because you have wells in your own district, but in southeastern Pennsylvania, we actually don't have a single well.
Different geological formation. In fact, right here in central Pennsylvania, what people think of as South Mountain is actually the continental divide for when the last ice age was pushing the plates around. And it follows that line up through the northeastern part of the state and up into New York. And that's it's kind of neat. If you actually go to Kings Gap State Park and go to the top there, you can see on one side of the hill, it's one sort of rocks, and on the other side of the hill, it's another. And it's one of those points where you can quite easily see how those plates came together.
So all of this industry, business, production, and all like that is actually determined by rocks that have been around for, I don't know, a couple
Billions.
billions of years.
Billions.
Okay. So so down in the southeast, where we actually use a fair amount of electricity and other things that can come from natural gas, and we buy a lot of stuff that are made in factories that are fueled by natural gas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we also use some natural gas domestically. We have no wells. And we do have people who are worried about the environmental impacts of all this drilling.
I want people to be worried about the environmental impacts, and I know you are an environmentalist yourself.
Right, and I'm worried. The question I get most frequently, and maybe you as head of the environmental committee can help me answer this, is are you doing enough to make sure the water stays clean?
And the answer to that is yes, and nature does most of it. Is this process that's called fracking. Maybe we should talk a little bit about what fracking is.
What is fracking?
Fracking is an abbreviation of the word fracturing.
Okay.
And even 100 years ago, the folks that were drilling wells were fracking wells. But the way they did it 100 years ago is a bit horrifying. They would take like dynamite and just throw it down the hole, or take nitroglycerin and throw it down the hole, and boom.
Sort of like the way we did coal.
Sort of like, or the way we used to dig train tunnels. It's just, it's just go ahead and put in some dynamite and see what happens. Whereas now what happens is that, again, with the newer wells, you're drilling a mile down and then you go out horizontally. You're going out think of a soda straw that goes out horizontally.
Okay.
But in order for that soda straw to get through, you've got to drill a bit. But then once it's just really is like a soda straw, because you need to then fracture a bit of the shale so that it's loose enough that the gases there can escape.
So the shale's the rock, and you break it up, and then the gas comes up the straw to the top.
And it's really, and when you're that far underground, anybody who has swum in a swimming pool, you go down to the bottom, you can feel the pressure in your ears. And that's just from going 8 or 10 feet.
Right.
Well, imagine what the pressures are like a mile down. That's what gives the pressure to allow the gas to escape. Now, the good part about this from an environmental perspective, the way the fracturing is done is not with explosives anymore. It's done with water.
And sand.
And sand. And if you think about a beach, the water and the sand on the beach, if you've ever walked along the beach's edge, you'll see all sorts of things that may have washed up, whether it's driftwood or somebody's hat or whatever. And it has a friction effect. It softens it. It sands it down. And that's what the water and the sand at the initial creation of the well it does very much the same thing with the shale, and that's how the shale fractures. But you're down a mile.
So where's my drinking water?
Your drinking water, the aquifer, is up about 4,000 foot above.
Okay.
And because of gravity, water doesn't flow up.
Right.
Water only flows down. So this, in terms of the aquifer, using the deeper drilling is safer for our drinking water. And because you're under such pressure at those low levels, the water is not just flowing up. What it does, though, is that they do try to get the excess water out, but it comes up through the straw. And the older drilling techniques were actually where there was a greater concern for me about, will there be an invasion of the aquifer?
Right.
And when you're down a mile, you have to be careful when you're going deep into the ground that you're not damaging the aquifer. And the geologists, in terms of selecting where they go.
You have to have good well drilling casements.
The casements are.
The straw has to be very secure.
This is a straw that's wrapped in about a foot of steel and concrete all the way around. And
because if it's not, stuff could leak out.
we don't want any of that. And
Right.
the record actually is phenomenally good when you consider that over the past, say, 7 years, there's been roughly, I don't know, I'm going to say just about 4,000 wells drilled in Pennsylvania. And there's maybe been less than a handful that have had any problems whatsoever. And,
All right.
and I'm all for the oversight, but on the whole, if there are not too many people that I know who drive their car 1,000 times without having a fender bender. What you want to make sure, or a scratch from the shopping cart or whatever it is, but what we want to make sure is that if anything happens, that it's being attended to immediately and completely. The larger risks are really the almost boring stuff, what's already on the surface. We start with water on the
Right.
surface and we bring the water back up, but that water's been down a mile.
All right, so that's going to have some problems. Let's hold that thought for just a second because we need to take a quick break. Legislative Report will be returned in just a moment. Stay with us. We're talking about the Marcellus Shale and the natural gas industry in Pennsylvania and clean water.
Did you know that Fort Indiantown Gap, located in Lebanon County, is home to Pennsylvania's only Veterans Memorial? C.J. Frederick of Westchester, Bucks County, submitted the winning design that now honors those men and women who have sacrificed their lives in defending this great country. Dedicated to the Commonwealth on October 7, 2001, the Veterans Memorial is surrounded by freestanding walls and houses an amphitheater, which can accommodate large crowds during an event. Strategically placed in the front of the amphitheater is a tomb that reminds visitors of those who gave their lives protecting the freedoms of this nation. The design suggests a war-damaged structure in which Frederick wanted to impress upon those visiting the horrific arena of war. Now you know.
Did you know the Avenue of Flags presentation at Indiantown Gap National Cemetery has over 500 casket flags? Among the flags displayed are Commonwealth, territorial, and military flags. The flags are tied to 20-foot poles spaced 40 feet apart on both sides of the main drive of the cemetery. It takes about 2 hours to set up and take down all of the flags. Volunteers are encouraged to help with this task and must be at least 13 years of age. All of the flags are donated to the Avenue of Flags by families of the deceased. Now you know.
Welcome back. I'm State Representative Kate Harper. Representative John Maher is with me today. He's the head of the House Environmental and Energy Resources Committee, and we've been talking about the Marcellus Shale natural gas industry in Pennsylvania. And we've been talking about the good things and the bad things. So let's talk a little bit more about environmental worries from either fracking itself, which sounds not to be the problem, or the amount of water it takes to do the fracking, or what happens when the water comes back up and it's dirty. So what do we do with that?
The most important advance where Pennsylvania has led the nation is that Pennsylvania said when that water comes back up, you don't take it in a truck to a municipal water plant. We're not treating that water alongside drinking water. We're just not. The federal government's finally caught up to that position, but it was 4 years ago when Governor Corbett said, this must stop in Pennsylvania, and it has.
And that's because out near where you're from, in the Allegheny region, somebody used a municipal sewer plant.
Oh, a number of them did back then.
And when the water came through it, I mean, municipal sewer plants are supposed to treat something else entirely, and the water came out dirty.
It had problems, and I applaud that Governor Corbett took the action to call on the industry to stop it, and they did.
All right,
So
so
now
they're
what happens
mostly-
is there's separate plants that treat this water. The water is not returned to streams. It's not put into lakes. It's not put into the ocean. It's not put into the ground. It's treated separately, and then it's used again on the next well.
Okay, so we're reusing the water that we put in the well and then it comes out. We're talking millions of gallons here.
Correct.
And I've heard some concern about different things that happen as a result of the fracking process. For example, radioactive material can be released, but that's already in the earth, isn't it?
That's right. Most of Pennsylvania has significant radon beneath.
Sure. My own house, I had to get one of those radon systems.
Well, there you go. But
I have no gas that I'm aware of,
right.
no natural gas.
And the other thing is radon dissipates in air so easily that the home radon systems basically are ensuring there's a ventilation. It doesn't accumulate unless it's in a closed area. Well, if you're a mile underground, that radon's been in a pretty closed area for a while, and it can leach into the water, and so the water has got to be treated, and that's another reason to keep this as a closed system. The water comes into the ground, is used for the fracturing, is out of the ground, in a pipe, into a truck, into another pipe, into the treatment plant, and then it recycles and does it again. That water is not put back out for where it's going to affect you or me.
Okay. Now, what are the
Again,
advantages?
Pennsylvania is ahead of the whole
country,
the world on this. So that is something we can take pride in, of making sure that the environmental injuries that our state suffered during the gas and oil boom 150 years ago and 100 years ago, and during the coal boom, that sort of environmental damage is not
going to happen
And
again.
that's a goal I know you and I share, and I'm happy to say we've been in the vanguard.
So let's talk a little bit about the money. I think you and I both worked on the Marcellus Shale impact fee bill. I know I worked very hard to make sure that the local communities impacted by the drilling get some money, but also that some money goes to statewide programs like Growing Greener, which is very popular in my area.
Absolutely.
Buys open space, buys farmland preservation rights, things like that. So that has been throwing off millions of dollars, hasn't it?
It has. And exactly how much it's going to be each year depends on how many wells we're drilling. And it only attaches to the unconventional wells, the new style of drilling.
Okay.
But those new style of drilling, as we talked about before, because you can accomplish such a broader field of extraction than the traditional well, that we have far fewer wells. Instead of 5,000 new wells a year, we're probably going to have something less than 2,000 Marcellus wells drilled this year.
I just find it incredible that we could be standing here and a mile away, a pipe way down under the ground is collecting gas.
5 miles away even.
Right,
And
unbelievable.
which is another reason that the environmental impacts can be better managed. With traditional drilling, you had a pocket of gas directly beneath your feet. And if you wanted that gas, that's where you had to drill.
Right.
Whereas now we can say, well, where's an area that maybe has already suffered some environmental consequences, and let's recycle that piece of ground to go accumulate the gas from 2 or 3
that's
4
where we
miles
put the
away.
well.
Put the well here to go get the gas over there.
And okay, I know. I
And
think
it's the way you stay away from streams, you stay away
Right.
from all sorts of schools, you stay away from everything you want to stay away from. It can be done because of this newer drilling technique.
It's because we have the technology.
You have
to
the
do that.
technology, and we have to stay on top of making sure it's safe and it's secure and environmentally sound.
And is that something that your committee works on?
We are giving it a great deal of attention. In fact, there were regulations that were in the midst of being completed last session, which I'm talking code here.
Yeah, legislatureese.
Yeah, sorry about that. Last fall, there was a hope that the Department of Environmental Protection was going to complete a regulatory process that had been underway since the early 2013. And for one reason or another, changes in personnel and so forth, it didn't get finished. Now, the new administration has picked that up, and I'm unhappy to say, in a rather opaque process, has substantial changes to those regulations that did not involve hearings or discussions or anything. They just appeared. And now
Your committee has some right to comment.
Oh, we do, and we've just received these. They were published just on April the 4th, and we are studying them and reaching out to the environmental community, the drilling community, and all those others that are affected. As you mentioned, the effect of natural gas isn't just from turning on your stove. It's not just from fueling up your car. The effect of natural gas, that we have so many allied industries, and it's not just the ones which are obvious. Plastics, for instance, and propane. These are all extracted from the same flow. Isn't just natural gas. It's got all these other mineral attributes that are very valuable.
Well, let me tell you something else. I mean, I actually know somebody who lives and works in my district and buys and sells pipe.
Oh, sure.
And is selling a ton of pipe to the region of the state that has the
and in the southeast,
Marcellus Shale.
There's those old refineries.
Right.
And this has given
The
new
Sunoco
home
refineries for the folks at home.
Marcus Hook,
Right.
which maybe folks thought was nearing the end of its days. And what do you do with that sort of a spot?
Well, jobs. That's what we're losing jobs when they shut down.
And there's a pipeline that runs from just near my house to Marcus Hook, and there's a new pipeline being built right next to it to move some of this mineral-rich material that is not the natural gas itself, but are other things that are extracted, the anes, ethane, methane, and so on, which are then being processed and creating permanent jobs
for people to do.
In the southeast.
Right, which I think is key, and I don't think most of us get the connection. We don't think about it. And we might not get the connection between getting the cheap gas prices either, but
really?
I think the shale is really good for us.
The reason the price of gas has fallen worldwide is because gasoline worldwide's price has fallen because of Pennsylvania natural gas. There's no doubt about it.
So I think that's a good thing that people need to realize, because I know that some of my constituents are familiar with the bad effects of the coal industry and hope we don't make the same mistake twice. And we did make some mistakes.
100 years ago, the way folks went about, and up till maybe 50 years ago, the way that was operated, we're still paying for. You mentioned growing greener. And back in years past, when people were done with a mine, they just walked away from it.
Right.
Whereas now there are requirements so that when a well has reached the end of its life, which may not be for 40 or 50 years, but there's money on hand from the driller
to clean it up,
to plug it and secure it. And so we've learned from the environmental tragedies that our grandparents made, and I'm happy to say we're doing our best to avoid those problems.
Well, that's a good place to stop, and unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's program. I'm State Representative Kate Harper. If I can assist you with any state government matter, please call me at my local Bluebell office or contact me through my website. The information will be shown on your screen in just a moment. Thank you, Representative John Maher, for joining me.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Join us next time for Legislative Report.